Hey guys, welcome back to Books and Vlogs. Today we are going to do our first audiobook. So, that's exciting. Well, let me go get it. First, I can see our first audiobook of the channel, which is pretty exciting. Quite an honor. Are you honored? You should be. So, if you don't remember this book, this is from my bookshelf tour. As I can see, it's a series of 3. And I've read them before. They're very good. So I thought that some of you would really like this series as well. So let's get into it. Chapter 1. Bad News. Anthea breathes on the cold window, fogging the glass and wrote her name on the misty pane. Anthea Genevia Thornley. Jean, the upstairs maid, would have a devil of a time getting rid of the streaks, but Anthea didn't care. Maybe Jean wouldn't notice, and ever after, while the window fogged, Anthea's name would reappear. Anthea knew it would only be a matter of time before she was shunted off to another set of relatives. Nobody wanted her for very long, although they were all very polite about it. It would not have occurred to them not to be, any more than it would have occurred to them to refuse to take her in. And it wasn't as though she were a financial burden. Her parents had left her a substantial inheritance. Somehow, though, she always seemed to be in the way. She lived with Uncle Daniel and Aunt Deirdre for 3 years now, the longest she had ever stayed anywhere. But Anthea could see in the frozen expression on Aunt Deirdre's face that she was searching for some way to get rid of the unwanted girl. A new baby ought to do the trick, Anthea muttered, her breath misting the glass to complete opacity. At least I don't have to stay on as an unpaid nurse. One of her mother's cousins had used her as a maid of all work when she was hardly big enough to carry a coal scuttle. Anthea had been more than willing to be sacked for her poor silver polishing skills. After that, there was a second cousin whose son had pinched Anthea black and blue until she had slapped him in retaliation, and so on and so on. Uncle Daniel was a dutiful sort who frequently apologized for not taking her in sooner. He had been the ambassador to Coronach for most of Anthea's life, but when he had to return to Coronach in the city of Tavertine, Anthea had been unceremoniously dumped on his doorstep. Aunt Anne had put up with Anthea for nearly a year, she told her brother bitterly, and wasn't about to do it for another minute. Ooh, Anthea, Jean's going to be so angry with you. Anthea turned to see her cousin Belinda Rose, standing in the door of the bedroom they shared, her navy skirt and sailor blouse still looking fresh, and pressed her eyes round as she looked at the streaks on the window. Anthea straightened her own blouse, and then transferred the frown to her cousin. Are you going to tattle? I might, Belinda Rose said in a silky voice. Or you could do my arithmetic. Anthea snorted. I'd rather wash the window, she said, putting her hands to her hips. Go on and tattle. I'll tell Aunt Deirdre that you were going to cheat. Belinda Rose put out her lower lip, pouting and thinking at the same time. Oh, all right, she flounced off. Papa wants to see you in the library. She called over her shoulder. Grumbling, Anthea swatted at her unserged skirt, trying to restore the plaits. She wasn't sure that her cousin had dawdled all the way so that Anthea would be scolded for tardiness. Downstairs, Anthea knocked on the library door. The leather upholstered book-filled room was her uncle's sanctuary, and the children were only summoned within when they were in trouble, which meant that despite her best efforts, Anthea was summoned to the library at least twice a month. Enter. Anthea took her place on the brown fur rug in front of her uncle's desk. She clasped her hands at her waist and put her shoulders back, head high. She was trying for the exact pose depicted in the portrait of Princess Jeanette that hung in the entrance of her school. Uncle Daniel sat back in his large desk chair, his fingers steepled under his chin, and studied her. He did not seem impressed. Anthea sagged just a little. Even though it was highly improper, she spoke first. Belinda Rose has already told me the news. I'm sorry, I didn't want you to hear it from her first. He frowned, and I must speak to her about tattling. That gave Anthea a pang, since her cousin had just told her that she would not tattle. But then Anthea sighed, because it didn't matter, really. She would be packed and out the door before Belinda Rose had time to think of a suitable revenge. At any rate, Anthea, I am sorry about this. Uncle Daniel's face was strained. It's just that Deirdre and I didn't expect to have any more children. It has come as rather a shock and necessitated a few adjustments. That's all right, Uncle, she managed to say. She didn't enjoy being lumped into the adjustments, which also included moving a cradle into Elizabeth Rose's room. No one liked feeling like furniture. Anthea didn't comment on that, however, but steeled herself to ask the question that was really troubling her. But where will I go? I thought I had exhausted the hospitality of every one of my relations by now. She grimaced. She didn't mean to be a burden, but since no one wanted her to begin with, they were only too happy to find a reason to get rid of her. It didn't seem to matter how good her grades were, or what awards she won, or how polite and eager to please she was at home. She was an inconvenience no matter what she did. Her uncle gave her a pained smile. Yes, that's really what I wanted to speak to you about. There is, I'm afraid, only one other option. He straightened the row of silver pencils on his desk. It was Deirdre's idea, which is surprising, he muttered. Anthea crossed her fingers and silently prayed that the only option wouldn't prove to be a sinister aunt who smelled of mothballs and liked to have the death notices in the paper read aloud to her every afternoon. You see, Uncle Daniel cleared his throat and brought her attention back to him. There really is no flaw in your character. You're an amiable enough young lady, not without looks and charm. Brains for certain. I wish Belinda was at half fuel. But no matter. Your father left you with an ample finances as well, and I know you have a dream of taking up the rose before you marry. A worthy goal indeed. He paused, sighed, pursued his lips, and looked at the ceiling. Then why does no one want me? The question burst from her lips before she could stop it. She clenched her teeth to stop a sob from following. Uncle Daniel, to his credit, did not bother to argue, but looked at her gravely. Do you know what your father's occupation was? The question took her off guard and stopped the tears before they could fall. Not really, Anthea admitted. Actually, not at all. She long ago deduced that her father had not been very highly placed in society. After all, everywhere Uncle Daniel went, there were men who shook his hand and spoke in reverent tones of his work in the Foreign Office, but never once had Anthea encountered someone who knew her father. Anthea drew herself up nevertheless and remembered that her mother would never have married someone who wasn't of great importance. Before her marriage, Genevieve Cross had been a favored rose maiden. The Queen herself had arranged a cross-thornly marriage. Your father managed his family's estate, Uncle Daniel said, his voice clipped. It's in a rather unfashionable location. Quite out of the way, one might say. His brother, Andrew Thornley, is now the owner. He'll be your new guardian. I see. But she didn't. She'd never heard of Andrew Thornley. Had not known she had an uncle on her father's side, but Uncle Daniel had begun to speak again. He writes that he is thrilled to have you. Uncle Daniel frowned down at a letter on his desk. Anthea found this highly unlikely. No one was ever thrilled to have her, but it was nice of him to say so. It boded well for the next few months. You will leave in 2 days, Uncle Daniel went on. Your uncle will meet you at the train station outside the wall. The wall? One of her hands rose to the collar of her blouse. Calaba's wall? You send me to live near the wall? Uncle Daniel rolled his silver pencils beneath his palm. Not quite. The estate is some distance beyond it, I understand. Anthea felt the ground heave beneath her feet. Her voice came out as a whisper. Beyond the wall? In an exiled lands? Her knees were shaking as Uncle Daniel merely gave her a nod in answer. Without asking permission, Anthea sank down into one of the high black leather chairs. The exiled lands. That was where the crown sent traitors, pagans, and other undesirables. She had heard stories from the girls at school who came from northern Coronam. They said that exiles ate unspeakable things, like raw meat and goat eyeballs, and the women wore trousers while the men wore skirts, but nobody wore drawers at all. I'm very sorry. Her uncle looked sorry. In fact, his face looked lines and almost old, though he was not yet 40. Anthea wondered how much pressure her aunt had put on Uncle Daniel to force him to send his niece into exile, and how dreadful a burden was Anthea that the only option left to her was to be sent into exile herself. Is my other uncle, is he? Her throat was so dry she couldn't finish the thought, but Uncle Daniel knew what she was thinking. Andrew Thornley is not in exile, he said. Apparently she uses to live there. He says he will explain it to you when you arrive. Uncle Daniel straightened the letter again, his mouth a thin line. I am so sorry, Anthea. This isn't something I would wish on any young lady of brooding, but I am afraid that I'm rather at the end of my tether. Deirdre. He was saved from having to finish that thought by Dahlia, the downstairs maid, who burst in, her eyes alight with curiosity. She would be dying to get juicy details about Anthea's banishment she would carry back to the kitchen. Dinner is served, sir, she said, her eyes on Anthea. Thank you, Dahlia, Uncle Daniel said sharply. With a disappointed huff, the maid backed out of the room. She valued her job too much, however, to slam the door or listen at the keyhole. You're a good girl, Anthea, Uncle Daniel said. I'm sure that you'll be all right. In a few years you can look toward a ladies' college of some kind. There are none beyond the wall, so you will be able to return to Cronon then. You might consider teaching or nursing. Either of those would be nice. Anthea responded dully. What was running through her head was that she really wanted to be a rose maiden, like her mother and her Aunt Deidre. But would the queen select a maiden who lived among exiles? Her heart shuddered. She was ruined. Very good, Uncle Daniel said. He seemed relieved, and Anthea realized that after years of living with Aunt Deidre, he'd expected her to have hysterics. You'll be back in civilized society before you know it. He gave her a slight smile. Anthea? Thank you, she managed. You are welcome. You may be excused. And that is the first chapter of the Rose Legacy. I hope you enjoyed, and sooner or later, I don't know, maybe in like 2 weeks, I will be back for the second chapter. Have a great day. Peace.